Time to finish up our brain physiology, looking finally at the tracts. We've been talking about these all the way along. Remember, you've got bundles of axons that are out in the peripheral nervous system. Those are nerves. Spinal tracts are bundles of axons that are running up and down the spinal cord and into the brain. So they're kind of like nerves, but they're inside the CNS. They are pathways for information. So the spinal tracts bundles of myelinated axons that carry information through the spinal cord, generally named for their origin and their termination, and that's a big key here. Look at the name, and that tells you often where it starts from and where it ends. So look in the diagram in the lower right there. You can see a dorsal on the left side, dorsal spinocerebellar tract. Well, by God, it's going from the spine to the cerebellum, isn't it? See? Look at how. Reticulospinal tract, reticular formation, spinal cord, right? Corticospinal tract, going from the cortex to the spinal cord, all right? So look at the name, and that'll give you some information about what it is you're trying to figure out. So we have ascending or afferent tracts that carry sensory information. We've been talking about this since the first week of the nervous system. Those are going up, coming in from the body, going up to the brain, ascending, afferent, sensory information, and then descending or efferent tracts. Those are the ones coming from the brain down the spinal cord to go out to the body. Those are motor. Those are going to be for movement, okay? Most of them decussate. Not all, but most of them do. That's why, again, generally speaking, the left side of the brain registers things happening on the right side of the body, and the right side of the brain controls the movements of the left side of the body. Most have some degree of somatotopy, which we've talked about before, that point-to-point correspondence between a part of the body and a part of the CNS. So in other words, as the information comes in or goes out, it's grouped. It's grouped both on the part that's doing the sending, and it's grouped on the part that's doing the receiving. There's a correspondence between parts. Most consist of either 2 or 3 neurons, which we'll see coming up in just a moment. They're all symmetrically paired, so they occur both on the left and on the right. There are none that go right down the middle. In the same way that nerves are highways for information in the peripheral nervous system, spinal tracts are the highways for information in the CNS. That's what they are. These are information highways, okay? Think of them that way. That's what they're doing. They're either sensory highways or they're motor highways. Let's look at some ascending, some sensory highways. Carry sensory information from the body to the brain. Consist of first, second, and third order neurons. So a first order neuron comes in, it goes from the body to the spinal cord. Second order neuron goes from the spinal cord up to the thalamus. Third order neuron goes from the thalamus to a part of the cerebrum somewhere, of the cerebral cortex. So 3 orders of neurons. So the dorsal column medial lemniscal tract, we've talked about a few times before, arises in the medulla, terminates in the thalamus. Carries information for discriminative touch, so fine touch, like the kinds of things you can do with your fingers, all right? Careful, discriminative, telling the difference in textures and shapes and so on, all right? Then the spinothalamic tract, they're both ventral and lateral, carries information for pain, temperature, and coarse touch, all right? So this is not where you need to finally discriminate what things are. Just, is it hot or is it cold? Does it hurt or is it okay? That's the spinothalamic tract, going from the spinal cord up to the thalamus, okay? Spinocerebellar, both ventral and dorsal, carries information for muscle and tendon stretch, proprioceptive information. So this is going from the spinal cord to the cerebellum. Remember, the cerebellum, in order to be able to smooth out and coordinate our movements, it needs to know where our body is now. So that's the proprioceptive information, letting the cerebellum know, here's where we are now, and the cortex is telling the cerebellum where we want to go next, and so it computes the exact sequence of movements to do that, okay? Dorsal, by the way, does not decussate. I won't ask you that. I won't be anywhere near that picky. I'm just letting you know that most of them decussate, so most of them are contralateral. Here's one that's not, okay? So descending pathways, the opposite now, motor pathways, efferent, going down the spinal cord. They carry motor signals from the brain to the body. So upper motor neurons link the brain and brainstem to the ventral gray horns of the spinal cord. Lower motor neurons link the ventral gray horns to the skeletal muscles. So the lower motor neurons, these are the ones in your spinal nerves. These are the ones going out to make your muscles move, all right? The upper motor neurons are the ones that are coming from the brain going down to the ventral gray horns. Remember, I've been asking this since the first week we did the nervous system. I said, where are the cell bodies of spinal neurons? And those were in the ventral gray horn, remember? So yeah, so the upper motor neurons are coming from the brain to the ventral gray horn, and then the lower motor neurons are going from the ventral gray horn out to the skeletal muscles. Notice this is 2 neurons in this pathway. The sensory side had 3 neurons, first, second, third order. This has just 2, upper motor and lower motor. 2 principal pathways here. The direct or pyramidal pathway involves conscious control of the muscles of the body. The indirect or extrapyramidal involves unconscious or reflexive movements. So, deciding to reach out and grab a glass of water, that's direct, that's pyramidal, all right? On the other hand, if a fly lands on your arm, you usually have to think, I think I'm going to brush that fly away. It's a reflexive thing, isn't it? You automatically go, damn, get off of me. Within a matter of, a fraction of a second, you've already made that movement. That's indirect or extrapyramidal. These are the so-called unconscious or reflexive. If you get an itch, on your neck, you don't necessarily always have to think, I think I'm going to reach up and scratch that. You automatically just reach up and scratch without even really consciously thinking about it, okay? So do you get it? Direct or pyramidal, indirect or extrapyramidal. Now, some antipsychotic and antidepressant medications may produce extrapyramidal side effects. So this is back what we were talking about. We talked about the antipsychotic drugs working on the dopamine receptors. They produce those Parkinson type of results, effects in the poor schizophrenics and psychotics who were taking them. They include things like tremor, dystonia, like spasms, akathisia, restlessness. How sometimes you see people that sit there like rubbing their thighs and they're kind of looking around and they're all jerky and twitchy. That's akathisia. Parkinsonian, rigidity, inability to get those movements started. Tardive dyskinesia, jerky movements. Bradykinesia, slow movements. So these are all extrapyramidal. These are not really conscious. These are the unconscious, indirect movements. But some medications produce those effects. This is all the way back when we talked about how the Parkinson's people, some of those drugs that promoted dopamine, they ended up causing psychotic type of effects, whereas the psychotics taking the antipsychotic ended up with some of these more Parkinsonian types of effects. All right, those are extrapyramidal. They don't necessarily influence your conscious movements. They influence a lot of those unconscious movements. Let's talk about some of the pyramidal or direct tracts. Corticospinal arise in the motor cortex. Lateral decussates in the pyramids. Anterior remains ipsilateral. I will not ask you that. I will not expect you to remember that. I'm just showing that some of them decussate, some of them don't. They control voluntary movements of the limbs and the trunk, all right? So the upper part of the body. Reaching over to pick something up, with your torso, reaching out with your arm, those kinds of things. Corticospinal. Corticobulbar arrives from the motor cortex but terminating the brainstem. Bulbar is a root word that often has to do with the brainstem. Not always, but frequently it does. They synapse with cranial nerve motor nuclei to control muscles of the head and neck. As we'll see when we get to the cranial nerves in the fourth part of the class, they control some of the movements of your head and neck. So the corticobulbar tracts are doing that. Now the extrapyramidal or indirect tracts, all right? They originate in the brainstem, but they do not pass through the pyramids. That's why they are extrapyramidal. Remember, the pyramids are where the descending tracts decussate, where they cross over. So these extrapyramidal are ipsilateral. They do not decussate in the pyramids. Now, it has been determined relatively recently, in the past couple of decades, that these tracts are in fact influenced by pyramidal tracts. So whereas they used to be called extrapyramidal, they're now tending to call them indirect. So watch out. Old textbooks will call them extrapyramidal. New ones will call them indirect. Both are still okay to use. It's just I'm showing you there's an evolution of the terminology here. So rubrospinal begins in the red nucleus. Rubro, red. Remember we talked about the red nucleus in the midbrain? That was the eyes of the monkey. All right, that immediately decussates and descends through the pons and the medulla. Controls upper limb flexors and trunk flexors. That's why, remember, it was that area of the brain, the midbrain, that was affected in Parkinson's. That's why Parkinson's patients lack that arm swing when they walk, okay? Tectospinal, remember the tectum of the midbrain? That was where the colliculi were. That immediately decussates. Coordinates head and eye movements via the superior and inferior colliculi. Once again, that sort of unconscious movement. Remember extrapyramidal? This is, remember when we talked about the colliculi, if there's a sudden explosion off to the left, you immediately turn, to put your eyes and your ears on where the explosion was. You don't have to think about that. That's an unconscious movement. That's extrapyramidal. And again, tectospinal. It's going from the colliculi down to the brainstem. Reticulospinal and vestibulospinal do not decussate. They remain ipsilateral. Reticulospinal originates in the reticular system and in the pons. It's involved in control of postural muscles. Vestibulospinal arises in the vestibular nuclei, involved in control of postural muscles and maintain balance. So from cranial nerve number 8, which is involved in balance, these are helping to maintain your balance, okay? Again, unconscious stuff. If you suddenly trip or something like that, you don't have to think specifically of which muscles you're going to move to regain your balance. That's all happening automatically. Okay, so those were the pathways. Let's talk about just a little hodgepodge of other interesting topics involving the brain. Let's talk about sleep, something I know a lot of you are really good at. Sleep is a naturally occurring altered state of consciousness characterized by lack of awareness, inhibited sensory response, and reduced muscle activity. Did you ever think of trying to define sleep before? It's more complicated than you might have thought, but isn't that a good definition? Naturally occurring altered state of consciousness characterized by lack of awareness, inhibited sensory response, and reduced muscle activity. That's what sleeping is. We divide sleep broadly into what's called rapid eye movement, or REM sleep, and non-rapid eye movement, or non-REM sleep. Dreams typically occur during REM sleep. The body, by the way, is virtually paralyzed during REM sleep. That's because think about it. In your dreams, you're running from the chupacabra or whatever. Imagine if your body naturally shuts off the motor signals. If it didn't, you would be, running and crashing into walls while you're asleep. That would be very bad. So sometimes it may happen. You may have experienced this. Sometimes you awake out of a dream, and when you wake up, your body has to turn on motor control again. And sometimes that's a little bit delayed. And sometimes, you may wake up out of a nightmare, and you're lying in bed, and you still can't move. You're sort of awake, but you still can't move. They call it sleep paralysis. And you try to scream or yell, and you can't do it. That can be a very terrifying sort of feeling. I'll bet some of you have had that before. That for a few moments, you're paralyzed when you wake up. You can't yell or anything. Sleep paralysis, it's called. REM and non-REM sleep alternate in cycles of roughly 90 minutes, occurring 4 to 6 times per night. So basically what happens is then you have 4 to 6 episodes of dreaming every night. And during each REM period, you may have more than one dream. Dreams, they have decided, last about the same time as real time. In other words, if in your dream you're doing something that takes 10 minutes, that's probably about 10 minutes of real time. So we normally don't remember our dreams all that well. And our body has a reason for doing that, our brain. Because imagine if you were trying to remember, let's see, wait, did I pay the phone bill or did I just dream that I paid the phone bill? So it's a natural response that when you wake up, your body, your brain, quickly tries to wipe out your memories of dreams. That's why I used to teach a class in sleep and dreams. I had people keep a dream diary. And I told people, you have to write your dream down the moment you wake up. Simply waiting until after you've gone to pee, the dream can evaporate. I'll bet you've experienced that before too. I mean, you wake up and this dream is really vivid in your head and you go pee and then you're trying to think, wait, what was that dream? And it's all just like faded away. It's during non-REM sleep when you seem to secrete a lot of growth hormone. That's when your body repairs itself and restores. So really, both kinds of sleep are essential. The dreaming, the REM sleep, may be when you're doing things like that memory consolidation, when you're actually filing the day's activities into your memory. That's sometimes why dreams can seem so crazy, and they involve like both stuff that just happened and stuff from long ago. And you wake up and you think, damn, that dream was crazy. What's going on is your brain may be taking the stuff of the day and like putting it into file cabinets or like, storing it in computer files. It's connecting what happened today with all the various things that have happened in your past. And they think that maybe that's what dreaming is. Dreaming is just basically your awareness of all these file cabinet drawers being opened and things being put into files and taken out of files, and that's why dreams can be so crazy. Timing of sleep-wake patterns regulated by the suprachiasmatic nucleus. Again, that's the one that it doesn't like turn the sleep switch on or off. It just tends to know that it's about time we should be going to sleep. And then, there may be some extra release of melatonin from the pineal, so you start feeling a little sleepy and so on. So it's that roughly 24-hour cycle that the suprachiasmatic nucleus keeps track of. And again, that's why sometimes, if you're sleeping someplace new for the night, that may happen to you from time to time, you'll still wake up at about the normal time. That's the suprachiasmatic nucleus knows it's time to wake up. And again, the transition often governed by that ARAS, the reticular formation, the ascending reticular activating system. It decides when it's safe to go ahead and doze off, and then if something bad is happening around you, it will wake you up. It's monitoring your sensory surroundings even while you're asleep. Is the brain cool or what? So sleep. Interesting how throughout history artists have all had a fascination with sleep. Just great stuff. Aren't those great paintings? People asleep. Sleep is like such a magical state. It really is. We all do it. Imagine trying to explain to aliens who came to Earth. So like every day we lie down for like 8 hours and we don't do anything and then we get up again. They'd be going, wait, what? Sleep is such a weird thing. But it seems that both our brain and our body need it. It's kind of like the time when they repair themselves and where we sort of organize and sort through the things that have been happening to us lately. Nightmare on the left. Loyal Dog on the right. Great paintings throughout history. That painting on the right, is that glorious or what? Showing the dress like that? God, I think that's just a beautiful painting. And it really catches what it's like to be asleep. Upper left, little kid. Lower left, I don't know what's going on. Don't want to know. It's okay though. We're all free to do what we want. Let's finish up our last topic. Most humans use only 10% of their brain. What percent do you use? See, look at the person on the left. Working brain. It's like shriveled up. And the person has like a sort of an angry, glum look on their face. And then look on the right. Oh my gosh, the working brain. Look at how it's big and huge. And now they're like lightning bolts coming out of their head. And they have like x-ray vision and they're smiling. They're happy. Yes. Oh, they're using more than 10% of their brain. Most amazing facts about the human brain. Part 1. Why do we use only 10% of it? Do you know why we use only 10% of our brain? Do you? Do you know why? It's not clear where this ridiculous idea came from. It's really not. Nobody knows where the hell somebody came up with the idea that you would only use 10% of your brain. That's the goofiest damn thing anybody has ever heard of. Sometimes people say that Albert Einstein said that. He didn't. He didn't say anything remotely like that. It may date back to Harvard psychologist William James in the 1890s, who wasn't really saying that we only use 10% of it. He was just saying that kind of like, we're capable of doing more than we do generally. It's perpetuated by these nonsensical movies like Lucy. I don't know if you saw that. Morgan Freeman and what's her name? Scarlett Johansson. Oh, she's blonde and she's got big boobs. It all must be true. The brain is a highly differentiated organ, not a homogeneous blob of goop, as we've seen all the way through. Look at all the nuclei of the thalamus, the nuclei of the hypothalamus, all the different areas in the cortex, the sensory areas, the motor areas, the association areas, the cerebellum doing one kind of thing while the brainstem does something different, while the diencephalon does something different. For God's sakes, different parts of the brain do different things. They control movement, others receive sensation, they govern emotions, thoughts, regulate sleep and wakefulness, others monitor control of homeostasis and so on. Look, we use pretty much all of our brain pretty much all of the time. So just the next time you hear somebody talking about how we use only 10% of their brain, slap them, will you? Do it for me. Slap them for me. And if they want to know why you slap them, tell them I said to slap them. And go ahead, give them my phone number, my email address. I'll talk to them, all right? Because this whole nonsense about 10% of the brain is just complete garbage, okay? That finishes it. We covered the brain. We are now at the end of the third section of the class. Fourth section is going to be senses and the autonomic nervous system.